Okay, so this is lesson 2 in biology. So last time we talked about cells and the structure of cells. We're now going to move into the nucleus and talk about DNA and genetics. This is a huge topic, okay? Since we're in grade 10, I'm just going to brush the surface of many topics that could potentially be covered in genetics. We're going to briefly talk about DNA, what it is, what it looks like, what it does. Okay, and then we're going to talk about mutations. When something goes wrong with your DNA, that could lead to some serious illnesses, and some of which can even be deadly. Okay, and we'll then talk about some technologies, some innovations that we have come up with regards to changing the DNA. First with DNA screening, and then transgenic organisms, and finally cloning, all of which have something to do with genetics. So first of all, DNA. What exactly is DNA? DNA is actually an acronym. It stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. See, nobody wants to say that, so we just call it D for deoxyribo, N for nucleic, and A is acid. So the thing that passes on your traits from generation to the next, your genetic material, is in fact an acid. It is found inside of the nucleus of your cells. Now, all of your cells in your body have a nucleus. Well, except the blood cells, the red blood cells, they don't have a nucleus, but the other cells do. So in every single cell in your body, you have a complete copy of your DNA. Okay? How big is DNA? Like, how long is it? DNA is kind of like a book. Okay, it's like an encyclopedia. It's a huge book. It contains a lot of information that tells your body to build exactly you. Okay, you look like what you look like, you sound like what you sound like. To some extent, even your personalities are determined by your DNA. So that must be a big book because it tells everything literally about you. How big is it? Well, your cells are small, right? We learned about cells yesterday. We need a microscope to see them. Well, if you take one of your cells, you take the DNA out of the nucleus, and you stretch it out in a straight line, it will be 2 meters long, okay, from one of your cells. And you have trillions of cells. So you have a lot of DNA. Well, it is so long that we can't just stuff it in. So your body finds a way to organize it. DNA is neatly packed and wrapped into something called chromosomes. In the picture, you can kind of see a gene. Well, a gene is a segment of DNA that does something. For example, if you have brown eyes, well, there are genes that tell the body to make your eyes brown. If you have curly hair, there are genes in the body to tell your body to grow curly hair. Same thing for height, skin color, your muscle, I don't know, how fast your heart should beat. All of these things are controlled by genes that are part of your DNA, which is then wrapped together into like an X looking kind of thing called a chromosome, and then stored inside the nucleus of your cells. Okay, so DNA contains many genes. Sometimes we call them chromosomes because, well, DNA wrapped together to make chromosomes. So here's a typical chromosome. Chromosome is just condensed DNA. You have 23 pairs of them in every single cell in your body. Okay, 23 pairs. They come in pairs, meaning that there's 46 in total. Half of them come from your mother. The other half comes from your father. Now, when I said that all of your cells have 23 pairs of chromosome, well, I'm not talking about your sex cells, your sperm and your eggs. Well, you can only really have one, not the other, depending on whether you're male or female. Your sex cells only have half of them. They have 23 chromosomes, not 23 pairs. So if you're a male, you have sperms. Each sperm has 23. Each egg, if you're female, has 23. So when sperm meets egg, well, guess what? You have 23 pairs. That's when you make a new person. And that person should have 46. So that's why 23 comes from dad, 23 comes from mom to make 46. Now, humans have 46. That's not really special. Other animals, they have different numbers of chromosomes in their body. So, for example, dogs have 78. Mosquitoes have 6. Bananas have 22. The number of chromosomes, they don't really tell you much. Okay, you might think that, well, humans have more chromosomes than mosquitoes because we're more advanced, or smarter, or we're bigger than mosquitoes. Look at dogs. We're definitely smarter than dogs. We're bigger than dogs. So why do dogs have more? It doesn't really matter. It's just a number. So you can't really tell whether something is bigger or complex just simply by looking at the number of chromosomes. Okay, so we have 46. Okay, so DNA. How does DNA do all of these things, right? So DNA is like the instruction book on how to build your body. How exactly does DNA do that? Well, first of all, DNA can make copies of itself. That's quite important because when your cells need to divide, let's say you cut yourself, then your cells need to heal. They need to divide to heal the wound, okay? Well, when the cell divides, it has to copy its DNA so that the new cell also has a complete set of DNA. So DNA makes copies of itself. Also, DNA can make proteins. Proteins are basically the workers of the body. Proteins do so many things that it is difficult to summarize. And I listed a few things that proteins do in your body. Okay, they build the body, they can carry signals, hormones are proteins, they can transport stuff, they can make things go faster. If you get sick, proteins will come in your defense and attack the foreign particles. So proteins are extremely important. And DNA makes proteins. Okay, different genes make different proteins which have different functions. So it depends on what your body is trying to accomplish. The DNA will make specific proteins to do exactly what needs to be done, which is why we're all different, because we all have different DNA and we make different versions of proteins and they do slightly different things, which accounts for our differences. Okay, so that's how DNA builds the body, through making proteins. Now, what does it look like? Well, you probably have seen pictures of DNA somewhere in your life. If you watch TV, if you just go on the internet, this is pretty much cliche what DNA looks like now. It's a double helix. It's like a spiral staircase that wraps around itself. And between them, you have 4 different base pairs of guanine, cytosine, adenine, and thymine. You don't really need to know the names of these. Just know that they all start with different letters. G, C, A, T. That's what we refer to them by. Nobody wants to say their long names. So there are 4 different base pairs inside of DNA. They can come in different sequences, which literally spells out a message. Okay, so DNA wraps around itself in a double helix. There are 2 ribbons. Between them, connecting the 2 ribbons, are the 4 different base pairs. The 4 base pairs, well, they bond with each other with a very specific rule. If you are A, adenine, you will only ever bond with T, thymine. Okay, and G will only ever bond with C. Okay? That's it. You cannot bond with anybody else. So they always come in pairs. A always pairs up with T, G always pairs up with C, and those two will come together to make a double helix. Okay, there are two ribbons here, both with one set of base pair, and they come together, they match up, you have a spiral. These 4 letters are the alphabet of the DNA language. Okay, you can read DNA by reading the sequence of the letters A, G, T, C. They mean something. These sequences will determine what kind of proteins are made. If you change a letter, you change the message, which changes the protein that is produced. Does that make sense? So now we have the technology to literally read your DNA. Okay, you can submit an application online, I forget where, but we can sequence your DNA. That costs a lot of money, but you can do that, and then we'll have your entire DNA sequence on database. They could put it in a PDF, send it to you. You can read your DNA. We do that for a lot of other organisms. We do have DNA sequences for specific humans that have volunteered to do this. We have sequenced the genome of the coronavirus, which is quite important because we need to know what's in it so that we know how to beat it. Okay, so DNA is really a language, but it only has 4 letters. You don't need a lot of letters to write a sentence. 4 letters is just long. Okay, English has 26, so while there's a lot of variety, so you can have more words, but DNA just has 4. But that's enough because we're all here, so that worked out. Now, what if something goes wrong? Okay, because DNA is supposed to be this thing that builds our body. It has to be perfect, right? Well, it's not perfect. There are mistakes in your DNA, and we call mistakes in DNA a mutation. Okay, that means you changed your DNA for some reason. Well, mutations are, well, mostly bad. Okay, mostly it does nothing, but when it does something, it's probably bad. It's like you have a computer. It's great. If you drop it, you change the insides of the computer, I'm going to say that's probably going to be a bad thing. Okay, you could potentially make it better, but let's not kid ourselves. You probably broke it. So if you change your DNA, chances are you're going to screw something up. Okay, if you change the DNA, you change the protein it makes, and thus it will affect the ability of the protein to perform its job. If the DNA doesn't properly make the protein is kind of messed up. It will do a messed up job. Okay, if you have a messed up teacher, that teacher's going to teach you messed up things. You're going to be messed up, and you do bad things to society. So, which is why, teachers should be screened pretty well. I don't know why I'm hired, but whatever. So, how can you get a mutation? Well, there are 3 avenues to have the mutation. One is you screwed up yourself. You have no one to blame but yourself. When you make a new cell from an older cell, you have to copy your entire DNA. And that is long. It is 2 meters long at a cellular level. That is approximately 3 billion base pairs, or 1 billion base pairs, somewhere, I forget which one, but billions of base pairs long. Billions of letters needs to be copied. And you bet that you're going to make a mistake somewhere. Okay? If I ask you, here's the encyclopedia, copy it by hand and hand it in the next day, you're probably going to hand me something that's complete garbage. You're going to try your best to copy it exactly the way you see it, but there's probably going to be copying errors. You might spell a word wrong. You might skip a sentence. You might skip a word. You might skip whatever, right? You're not going to give me an exact replica of the encyclopedia. DNA has to be copied, and your body does so in around 20 minutes. So, well, there's going to be errors, and when there's errors, you have a DNA mutation. Okay, so that's one way of getting a mutation. You screwed up. Another way is through chemicals. For example, cigarettes. If you're a big fan of smoking, there are many chemicals inside of cigarettes that can react and bond with your DNA, changing the structure of your DNA, so thus changing the letters. So that causes mutations, and mostly bad mutations. Not just cigarettes. If you work at like a chemical company, like if you work with benzene, there's asbestos, there's a lot of things that can cause changes in your DNA, which are pretty much bad. Okay. Last thing is high energy radiation. If you go get an X-ray, notice that the doctors give you a piece of lead. If you're a boy, they give you a piece of lead to put in front of your crotch, so that the X-ray does not get to your crotch, because if it does, it will change the DNA inside of your sperms. And should you have kids, well, that's not going to be good. Okay, if you're a lady, they don't do that, but they will ask you, are you possibly pregnant? They're not asking, are you pregnant? Are you possibly pregnant? If you think you might be, don't do it. Because if you are, then that's going to harm the child. So radiation can be dangerous. It will break DNA and make it something else. So if you go to Cuba and you decide to go to the beach and you don't have sunscreen, bad idea. Okay. Radiation from the sun, like ultraviolet radiation, not only causes sunburns, but can also give you melanoma, which is skin cancer. And cancer is derived from mutations in your DNA. So 3 sources of mutations, all of which can cause a change in DNA. So how bad can it be, right? If you make a mistake, well, okay, so what happens? DNA is supposed to be this big thing, okay, billions of letters. So what if you make like 1 or 2 mistakes, right? If you give me an essay, let's say you take English, your teacher wants you to write an essay. You spell 1 word wrong in the essay. No big deal. You might even still get perfect if the teacher is being nice to you. Okay. So, well, what if I have my DNA wrong? Okay, what could go wrong? Well, it depends. Here is a condition that is caused by mistakes in DNA. This is called sickle cell anemia. A sickle is kind of like a curved knife. Like the communist symbol is a hammer and a sickle. Okay, a sickle cell is a red blood cell that looks like a sickle. So in the picture, a normal blood cell is round. It looks like a disc. It's like a donut, except it doesn't have the hole in the middle. That's a normal cell. It's supposed to carry oxygen in your body so that your cells can breathe oxygen and produce energy. It's very important. But if you have this condition, your red blood cells are sickle-shaped. That has some effects on your body. Well, first, you are terrible at carrying oxygen, which is the primary function of the blood. So you suffer from anemia, okay, a lack of blood or oxygen. Second, because you're sickle-shaped, you can hook onto things. And if you have a lot of sickles, you hook onto each other, which can generate a blockage. You can clog your own arteries with your blood. So that leads to a lot of swelling, pain, and even stroke. Okay, of course, and you're lacking oxygen all the time. So if you suffer from this condition, you suffer for your entire life. There's no cure because there's a mistake in your DNA. And that mistake is present in every single cell in your body. There's no way for a doctor to fix that. Okay, so you're not going to live a very satisfying life if you have this condition. And I can safely say that none of you guys have it, because if you do, it will be very obvious. So what went wrong? Well, how do you get this? Here's how. Inside your DNA, your billions of letters, there is one single mistake that changes a letter T to become A. That's it. That's the mistake. 1 out of billions of base pair, and this will ruin your life. It is like I give you an assignment. Your assignment is go to China, find out the names of everyone in China and write them down, and then hand it in on Monday. Okay, you come back on Monday. I check the list of 1 billion people. You make 1 mistake, I failed you. That's it. That's how serious this is. 1 little mistake can cause a drastic difference. As to why, well, that is more complicated biology than I care to teach you in grade 10. If you're interested, grade 11 bio should offer more insights as to exactly why this is the case. Or actually, grade 12 bio. Okay, so DNA mutations can be really, really deadly. Even 1 mistake can be tragic. Here's another one, Huntington's disease. That's quite a common disease in humans. It's a genetic disorder, meaning that it is something wrong with your DNA. Okay, and genetic disorders cannot be cured because we can't fix your DNA. It's not like you can take a pill and make it go away. Okay, what's wrong if you have Huntington's? Well, normally the effects start to appear when the person hits the age of 40. Slowly over time, that person will lose control of his or her muscles, and the brain will eventually become worse and worse until it stops working. At that point, you're dead. Okay, the symptoms will worsen, so it's really tragic. You watch a person, an otherwise healthy person, slowly deteriorate both physically and mentally until their death. And there's nothing we can do about it. And this is genetic. If 1 of your parents have it, you have a perfect 50% chance of having it. If none of your parents have it, then you don't have it. Okay. Also, if you have the genes for Huntington's, then you will definitely get the condition. It's not like a probability. If you have the genes, you might get lucky. Nuh-uh. If you have the genes for Huntington's, you will 100% get the disease. So if your parents don't have it, congratulations. They will never have it. You won't have it. So that's a really serious condition. It's genetic as well. Okay. Also, this is a famous one, Down syndrome. Again, you may have heard of this from social media or TV or just, I don't know. Down syndrome, what exactly is Down syndrome? Well, it is also a genetic disorder. What is this disorder? You have an extra chromosome. That's right, an extra. You're not missing one. If you're missing a chromosome, you won't be alive in the first place. You wouldn't even survive the womb of your mother. Okay, there are many pregnancies that result in an embryo that is missing a chromosome. That is automatically dead. Okay, that's called a miscarriage. That person never comes to be. So you can't be missing a chromosome. Okay, there's one exception. You're missing the Y chromosome. That's the only exception. If you're missing any other chromosome, you won't make it past birth. Okay, if you have an extra chromosome, most of the time you won't make it past birth. There are only very few and specific exceptions where you have an extra chromosome, you still survived long enough to be born. And only even smaller percentage of that, including Down syndrome, you can survive to become an adult. The rest of them are dead like at the age of 1. Okay, that's how serious it is to have an extra chromosome. And if you have Down syndrome, then you have 3 chromosome 21. Okay, your 21st chromosome has 3 copies instead of 2. This is also called trisomy 21. It's actually quite common, 1 in 800. Okay, what happens if you have it? Well, you have mental and physical challenges. Your face looks in a particular, you look more rounded. And usually the stature is quite short with a large forehead. And one of the defining features of Down syndrome is if you look at the palm of your hand, you will have a crease a fold across your hand. We call it a simian crease. A normal hand wouldn't have that. And I know a lot of you are looking at your hands right now. Okay, you probably don't have it. If you have it, then again, it will be very obvious. So 1 in 800 is not rare at all. But how many people with Down syndrome do you personally know? I'm going to go ahead and say 0. It's very rare to know someone with Down syndrome. You might know 1, but I don't think you know more than that because they're rare in the population. But wait, I said 1 in 800. It seems like it's more like 1 in a million. So what happened to the rest of them? Well, that's where this comes in. DNA screening allows pregnant mothers to find out the genetics of their kids or the potential kids to see whether they have any problems. And this is able to detect genetic disorders like Down syndrome. And you can imagine what happens if a mother finds out that the baby that they're carrying has Down syndrome. More than 90% of Down syndrome pregnancies end in abortion. So that's why you don't see a lot of people with Down syndrome alive because they were never born. Now, some mothers decide to go through with the pregnancy anyway for reasons probably ethical. So yeah, there are people with Down syndrome because their mother decided, or they didn't get the screening and, well, they have Down syndrome. So the ethics of DNA screening, there's a lot of concerns. Well, it can do a lot of good, okay? If you have Down syndrome, sickle cell, or Huntington's, or the other diseases we didn't mention, it will tell you, okay? When you're pregnant, you go see your doctor. They will extract some fluid from your womb, and there's DNA of the baby in there, and they can look at it, and they will figure out whether they have these issues or not. If you find out, most of the time you abort the child. Again, that's your personal decision. No one's going to tell you what to do. The pros, well, the pros are obvious. You find out whether your embryo has a genetic defect. Okay, and this might change your life. If you raise a child with a severe genetic disorder, that can seriously take a toll on your life, and most people wouldn't want to go through with that, so they get the DNA screening. Now, obviously, you can see where I'm going with this. There are concerns. Why? Because the argument is, see, we can only detect genetic defects. We can't cure it. You see what I mean? So there's no good that can come out of this test. You cause needless suffering. You deprive potential babies of their right to live just because they have a genetic defect. You're not really saving lives. So that is a huge ethical concern. But this test is very common. I'm at an age where a lot of my friends are married, they're having kids. Well, I'm still, I don't have kids. So I get really annoyed when people talk about their children. But, I've learned enough to know that if you're pregnant, you go get the test and everything's fine. They come back, they celebrate, cool. Okay, I don't know anyone personally that the test came out with a problem, but the test is the common thing to get. Okay, I know if in the future, if I'm having kids, I'm definitely getting the test. Again, you might disagree with that. You might think this is a terrible idea. You might not want to go through with it. But so far, most students I've taught are okay with that. So I'm just curious. You personally, do you agree with getting the DNA screening? Just into the chat, type yes or no. You don't have to tell me why, because you're online. It's going to be a long paragraph. It's fine. Chloe says it's fine. Oh, wow. Yes. So far, all yeses. Okay. Which makes sense because most people think this is okay, which is why it is a legal procedure, which is why most people get it. So, okay, the ethical concerns aren't all that bad. Sure. Okay. What about, well, we will eventually talk about more controversial ones. That was the first one. So speaking of mutations, here's an interesting fact. Most of your DNA is completely useless, complete garbaggio, okay? First of all, the mutations. There are 3 types. If there is a mutation with your DNA, it can either be a silent mutation, that means it doesn't do anything, thank goodness, or it can be a deleterious mutation, that means that sucks, it does something bad to you. Or in the very rare case, that mutation actually benefited you in some way. Okay, it can be a beneficial mutation, but that's rare. Most of the time, it does absolutely nothing. Now, why is that? Why would changing your DNA do nothing? Because most of your DNA is useless. Okay, look at the pie chart. I know there's a lot of stuff in the pie chart. Don't worry about them. Look at that red slither right there. It says protein coding genes. I said that DNA makes proteins, and proteins build your body. Well, it turns out less than 2% of your DNA builds proteins. What does the rest of them do? Well, another around 20%-ish, they are regulatory sequences. They help with making proteins, okay? They turn on and turn off certain genes. They kind of make the decisions of what proteins to make. So they're not useless. But the rest of it, the other 75%, they do absolutely nothing, okay? Even worse, some of them do something that is totally bad for your body. So most of your DNA you can live without. If you actually just cut them out, your body won't even know the difference. They're there, well, because of, how do I explain this? They're there because your body doesn't see the need to remove them. Okay, it's like your notes. You made a mistake, you crossed it out, and you wrote something new. You didn't bother erase it, you crossed it out, so you know not to read it, but it's still there. It's kind of like that. And a lot of them actually does bad things. A lot of them came from viruses that our ancestors accumulated over the course of millions and billions of years. Viruses attack your genes, they insert themselves into the genes. Sometimes they're stuck there, and that they become part of your DNA. So a lot of your DNA were remnants of ancient viruses. All they do is make copies of themselves and stick themselves somewhere else in your gene. And that can be bad because it's wasting your resources. And if you stick yourself in the middle of an important gene, you kill the gene, which is very, very bad. So 70% or 75% of the DNA are useless. So if a mistake happens with those, no problem. It is like nothing happened. Okay? A small chance, a very, very small chance that a random mutation improves the performance of something. Okay, and that's how evolution occurs. You depend on that probability of something happening that improves the performance of the organisms. And once that happens, then that advantage will grow. If you have an advantage, you're going to outcompete everybody else and you become prominent in the population. So there is a small chance. The mutations are not all bad. In fact, if there weren't any mutations, we wouldn't be here because evolution needs mutations in order to introduce variation. Okay. So speaking of the genetic code and mutations, well, the genetic code is universal. Now, what does that mean? Take, for instance, you're here because on some levels you understand English, right? If I'm teaching this class in another language like Mandarin, you will all fail because none of you, I presume, speak it. So I must speak a language where everyone understands. And you chose to be in this course, so that means you have some comprehension of English. It has to be a universal language, but English is not universal in the world. You see, many other countries don't speak English. In fact, most countries don't. The fact that you speak English is either A, you're born in an English-speaking country, or B, you decided to learn it. See, but the genetic code, the message, the language of DNA is universal. All organisms on Earth speak it. Okay, not like languages. You all speak different languages. Just curious, anyone speak a different language? Mara, what do you speak? Because I see your name.
I speak Malayalam.
Okay, I'm sorry, I never heard of that one, but yeah.
Yeah, it's an Indian language.
Oh, so it's not Hindi.
It's not Hindi.
Oh, okay, interesting. Oh, Noor speaks Arabic. Okay, that's interesting. Timer, what do you speak? Urdu and I can't even say the other one. I'm sorry. Okay, Urdu is a really common language in Canada. So yeah, see, you guys speak a lot of languages. I actually don't know if any other students speak any other languages. I know Karan speaks Japanese. Chloe, do you actually speak Korean? Or Pearson, do you actually speak Korean? Oh, Angie speaks Korean. That makes sense. Your name is Korean. Oh, I actually didn't know you spoke Korean, Angie, because your English is so good. I just assumed that you were born here and never learned it. What do you mean like French? You speak Korean like you speak French. Okay. We all speak different languages, but in order to communicate, you have to learn a new language. You see what I mean? If you go to Korea, you better hope and pray that the person you speak to speak English. Otherwise, you have to speak Korean with them. You see what I mean? Now, let's say I assign a paper. Like here's a homework project. I need you guys to hand in. You have to write this report. Okay, and let's say Angie writes a report. She forgets to put her name on it, and then she loses it. She drops it, and Pearson luckily picks it up. Pearson reads it. Tears started to come out his eyes because it was so beautiful. It was like the best thing he's ever read. He decides to put his name on it and submit it. Can he do that? Like, is he able to do that? I'm not saying whether he should. Is that a possible thing that he can do? Okay, and you wouldn't forget, but I don't know. Okay, maybe you didn't forget. Pearson walks by your desks, sees that paper that he didn't do, crosses out your name, and takes it. I'm not saying he would, but like, let's say that happens. Whiteout, there we go. He has a plan. That is something he could do. You see what I mean? Because it is the same language. Now, if Angie wrote it in Korean, most people wouldn't be interested in it because they wouldn't understand it. So it doesn't take a lot of effort for him to steal someone else's paper because it's written in a language that he can understand. You see what I'm getting at? DNA is a universal language. If your body speaks it, then your dog speaks it, mosquitoes speak it, the coronavirus, unfortunately, speaks it. That's why it can attack you. So let's steal from, no, that is not the point what I'm trying to make. So different species of organism can read the DNA of everyone else if they got their hands on it. Okay. Normally, you wouldn't get your hands on someone else's DNA, so you wouldn't have a chance to read it. But viruses, that's exactly what they do. COVID-19, it attacks you by entering your cells, sticking its own DNA into your DNA, and then uses your body's proteins to make more coronaviruses. And then once you package more, you kill the cell that it was in, it bursts out with many more copies and infect more cells. It can do that because it can read your DNA. Okay. How can we use this to our advantage? Okay. Well, here's where transgenic organisms come in. These organisms are genetically modified such that you take DNA from one organism, you put it somewhere else. Okay, it is like stealing someone else's paper to use it as your own because it was such a great idea. So we call them genetically modified organisms, or GMO for short, because again, nobody likes to say that. This is a real example. Okay, you have a fish, the Antarctic cod. The name Antarctic suggests that it lives in the South Pole. It loves cold water. So it has a gene that allows them to tolerate cold temperatures so that they don't freeze to death. Okay, antifreeze fish. That gene is found only in this fish. That seems like a good idea, doesn't it? In Canada, we have a cold climate. If you want to grow food, we need to grow it in a warmer place, and a lot of places in Canada don't have that temperature. Let's say tomatoes. Tomatoes needs warmth. But what if you take that gene from the fish, it is cold resistant, you copy and paste it, and give it to the tomato. And the tomato reads it, hey, this is a great idea, let me try that. And now all of a sudden you have GM tomatoes that contain the genes of the Antarctic cod, and now you can grow it in Canada because it is now cold resistant. Okay, again, I didn't make this up. This is a real thing. So this is GM foods. That's what this comes from. And there are more examples of this. You can modify the genetics of corn to make it sweeter, to make it contain more nutrients. You can modify your crops to be pest resistant. If bugs eat it, they die. That would be a nice trait to have. Or pesticide or herbicide resistant. If you spray herbicide, all the other weeds die, but your crops live because it's resistant. Okay, you can make it live longer, grow bigger. In fact, we do all of that. A lot of foods in the supermarket are genetically modified. You won't even know it is genetically modified because they don't label it. When you buy corn, it's probably modified. If you go get soy in the store, like soy milk, it's probably modified. Potatoes, probably. They don't have to tell you because there's no law dictating that they have to tell you. Now, people will advertise that my product is not GMO, non-modified, just because some people really hate the idea of modified food, so they go for the ones that are not modified. So these people, they put it on the label, non-GMO product. Okay. Now, this also raises a lot of issues. The pros are obvious. If you modify your food, you can make it into whatever you want, right? More nutritious. You can live longer so it doesn't rot as quickly. Bugs can't eat it, so farmers have a bigger yield. You can grow it in less favorable environments like colder climates, even hot, dry climates like in the Middle East or Northern Africa. And you could just simply make it grow bigger so you have more production. So in fact, the world uses a lot of GM food. Okay, what's the problem? A lot of people believe that GM foods can lead to health problems. Okay, there are known health effects, despite the fact that there are many studies done on GM foods, and they all conclusively say that there are no adverse health effects of eating them. But since we cannot do any long-term studies, we don't know what will happen down the line. If you grow up on a diet of pure GM food, we don't know what effect that would have like 40 years later, because you can't do a study for 40 years. So we don't know. Okay, but the short-term effects are no problem. It is completely safe to consume them. That's why it is legal for companies to not tell you it is GM, because it's not going to affect your health anyway. What about the other cons? Well, it can disrupt ecosystem. Now, what do I mean by that? Imagine this, okay? You're growing some, let's say, you're growing anti-insect corn, okay? Grasshoppers jump on your corn, takes a bite, dies. No problem. Well, what if a butterfly lands on your corn? Licks your corn, the butterfly dies. Well, guess what? Butterflies are needed for pollination. And they're also a food source for, I don't know, bats. And because there's a drastic decline in butterflies because they licked the corn and died, the bats have difficulty finding food, so they die. And mosquitoes are really happy because the bats are dead, mosquitoes proliferate, they spread malaria, we're dead. I made that up, but that is something that could happen, so it does disrupt the ecosystem. Okay. Another real concern is companies like large corporations. They manufacture these GM food. They sell the seeds to the farmers. If you're a farmer, you want to grow these food, you got to buy it. Okay, you can't do it yourself, so buy it from these companies. Okay, cool. They plant the seeds. The wind blows. Some of the pollen lands next door. That farmer didn't buy the seeds. So they have now GM crops in their field. The companies sue them because they're using their products without paying. The farmer goes bankrupt, and that's a monopoly. Okay, some company can monopolize food. Only they are able to sell you the seeds to the food, and they control the prices. And you can see how bad that is. If you monopolize something really important like food, well, you're going to have to trust that the company is very ethical and they won't try to take advantage of you, which is probably not going to happen because what's the point of a company? To make money. So that's a huge concern. Monsanto is one of those companies. They own like 90% of the GM foods out there. So yeah, that's why people are against GM food. My mom really hates it. She hates it for the reason that she thinks it's unhealthy. I try to tell her that that's actually not one of the reasons why you should hate it. Like, I'm not going to say you shouldn't hate it. That's not a good reason, though. Like, you should hate it because of the ecosystem, because of corporations, but there's actually no studies to suggest that eating GM food will cause negative health effects. That's actually a very common misconception. People think that GM food is made in a lab. Okay, people think they take the tomato, they go into the lab, they take a syringe, inject some chemicals in it, and put it back. That's not how this works. You change the genetics when it's still a seed. Okay, so those are the pros and cons of GM food. So very quickly in the chat, do you support or oppose this? And you don't have to tell me why, because again, it's kind of hard to do that over the internet. So just yes or no into the chat, please. Yeah, this one's a little harder because it's more controversial than the previous one. Folks. Okay, Marvin says yes. He's okay with that. Not really, but kinda. That's like a middle answer. You're okay with it, but you wouldn't support it. Okay, I see what you're saying. Both. Okay, how can you be both? Same as SNC. I don't like them, but I don't care if I eat it or not. Yeah, okay. I see where you're going with that. See, most people are kind of on the fence here because you have no reason to passionately hate it, but you know there are some negatives. But consider the positives, because I've been focusing on the negatives, right? The way that I'm teaching this is biased. I personally support it, but for me, I thought the pros are obvious, so I didn't really spend a lot of time talking about them. I instead focused on the cons. But consider the pros. This drastically increased food production. Okay, think about the corn that you buy from the supermarket, how sweet that corn and how watery it is. Corns aren't found like that. We had to change it. You see what I mean? A lot of food are modified in our favor, and we don't even realize it. So again, there are two sides to this coin. You can either support or oppose it, but make sure you know why you're supporting and why you're opposing it. There are good arguments to support and oppose, okay? please make sure you know what they are. Like I'm talking about real life, not for the course. Now, when you become older, your opinion matters a little bit more. When you try to affect other people, make sure you know exactly why you're doing it, and make sure that you know that your reasoning is correct. Okay. But isn't industrial farming bad? Yeah, that is a different issue. Industrial farming, yeah, that is definitely. Well, I don't want to use the word bad, but that is not sustainable. Okay. There are ways to make it more sustainable, more green. That's actually different from what we're talking about. So Rita is straight up against. Okay, there's one against. All right, so the last little controversial thing. Yeah, this is really controversial. You can clone things. We've had this technology for a while. So how does this work? You can take a cell, okay, from anywhere in your body, extract the nucleus of the cell and toss out the rest of it, because you really only need the nucleus. Inside the nucleus, you have the good stuff, DNA. That's what makes you who you are, right? If you want to clone somebody, in this case, that sheep, you take out the DNA from one of her cells, you find a surrogate mother, take one of her eggs, remove the DNA, and you put in your DNA, and you put it into the mother so that the mother is now pregnant with a cell that came from another sheep entirely. So whatever is born is going to grow up to be exactly identical to that donor, hence a clone. Okay, we have successfully cloned a lamb, named her Dolly, died prematurely, but we did it anyway. It was successful because the lamb was born, it was healthy for a while, and somehow died of organ failure. The technology has gotten better over time, and technically we can clone a person. Okay, you could take, I don't know, Mr. McMaster, take one of his cells, take an egg from a female, remove the nucleus, put McMaster's nucleus in there, put it back to the female gets pregnant with a new version of Mr. McMaster, but in baby form. When that person is born, it's going to be the infant version of Mr. McMaster, same exact DNA. I don't know why anyone will want to do that. I don't think his parents will want to do that, but no, that is a possibility. We are able to do that. That's the key thing here. We're not doing it, but we are able to. Why aren't we doing it? Oh, God. Yeah, this is really touchy here. We're definitely not doing it with people for ethical reasons. You're not going to create a person, okay, in the lab. Then the human rights come in, like, how should we treat that? Or should there be restrictions? North Korea clones an army. Oh, no. So we're not doing it with people. Okay, that's a consensus across the world. Like, there are very few things that the entire world agrees on. Even the most ridiculous totalitarian regimes like North Korea, even they are not okay with that. Can we actually make a clone? We can. We have the ability to, but we're not doing it. Okay, that's important. We're not doing it. No humans have been cloned ever, but many animals have been. Because it's so touchy that we need to have a lot of discussions. We could clone animals for meat. Instead of farming them, we can straight up clone them, or milk. You know what I mean? Okay, I have more comment. What about endangered species? Okay, I see you're thinking there. The problem with endangered species is the variation in the species is very low. If you have, like, let's say 8 rhesus monkeys left in the world, yeah, sure, you can clone them to make it 1 million, but a genetic clone is identical. And when they try to mate with each other, they will suffer from inbreeding, depression. The same reason that you shouldn't breed with your family. If you clone them and they breed, they will have all kinds of genetic disorders and they will just die anyway. So that doesn't work. It's really hard to save an endangered species because of this. Okay, there are many things that are endangered. You can't exactly just clone them. You're going to have to slowly make sure that they breed more. There's more variation, but you try to crossbreed such that you minimize the amount of inbreeding. Can we make Jurassic Park? No. Jurassic Park is complete fiction. Dinosaurs lived 65 million years ago. Okay. If you're going to clone a dinosaur, you're going to need the dinosaur's DNA. And DNA will not live forever. 65 million years is more than enough time for all the DNA to completely disintegrate. There's no way we can get our hands on dinosaur DNA. So we can't have Jurassic Park. But if we do, we can potentially do it if we can get our hands on dinosaur DNA. I don't know if you watched Jurassic Park, but from watching those movies, I'm going to say don't do it because I don't want pterodactyls to fly over my neighborhood. You see what I'm saying? So yeah, there are a lot of things that we could do, but probably shouldn't do. And I mentioned that Dolly died. Dolly didn't live a full life. So if you clone an animal, there could be unknown side effects. So we don't know what effects that would have on the cloned individual and how good its meat would be. So I'm going to ask you again, yes or no, are you in favor of cloning? Well, not humans, but animals. Yes or no? Oh, God, Pearson, yes. Okay. Chloe says it's fine. I hope this is for productive purposes. Okay, Marvin is I'm getting more reasonable answers now. Pearson advocating cloning of humans. Cool, but no. Okay. I'm glad you guys see the common sense side. Remember what Chloe and Pearson said in the chat today. If one day you walk on the street, you see a billboard, one of these two are running for political office. You know exactly who not to vote for. All right, so I have a video that I'm not allowed to show you on camera because this is made not by me. It's copyrighted. So I'm gonna end the video of the recording and show you this, and hopefully the quality is decent. Okay.